This is episode 4 of Paper Cut for January 25th, 2021. Welcome to episode 4 of Paper Cut, the Nyack Libraries podcast. Our guest is Kim Garrison. She is an attorney from Grant & Lyons, located in Rhinebeck, New York. Grant & Lyons is a small firm with 2 attorneys. Their practice is dedicated to land use, environmental, and real estate law. Kim also enjoys watching movies, from the classics to cult classics. If the opportunity presents itself, she inserts movie quotes and references in everyday conversations, and she's always looking for new recommendations. And she's one of my very good friends, so I'm glad to have her on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Tracy Dunstan, and I'm the head of adult services.
Hi, I'm Georgia. I work in the programming department with Rosemary.
And I'm Rosemary Farrell. I'm the senior librarian for programming and community engagement.
So today's episode is about lawyers and courtrooms. We're going to change up our normal format a little bit and just do kind of a general discussion about the Supreme Court while also talking about books, movies, and television shows. So we are going to be having a program in April about the Supreme Court given by Kim. So this is kind of like a little bit of a teaser for that program. I think it's on April 10th. We just figured that out. So we're going to be asking some general questions. So Kim, are you ready?
I am.
Okay, all right, cool. Okay, so our first question is, who decides how many justices are on the court?
So it's actually decided by Congress. There's nothing in the Constitution that specifies the number of justices that should be on the benches. In fact, it was actually, sorry, going ahead of myself a little bit, but and the process is that so Congress decides the numbers, and then the president nominates a justice, and then the Senate has to confirm that nomination just by a simple majority. And there's also really no set qualification to be a justice in terms of like for other political offices. There's no limit on the age or the education, and they don't even have to be a lawyer, honestly. They just have to have a practice in law, but they don't have to be a practicing attorney. They don't have to even have graduated from law school. That's not so much the case now, but certainly back in the beginning of the Supreme Court, that was, it wasn't unusual for people to have not attended law school. They usually just did an apprenticeship.
Like Kim Kardashian.
Well, hopefully not. We do want a little bit of clarity in the Supreme Court with the Kardashians. Who knows though? They are making a lot of headway. So.
Yep.
Have there always been 9 justices?
No, actually, over the course of history, there's been a few changes to the number. That's what I started going into a little bit, and then I was like, oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. But when it was first set up, it was actually set for 6 justices. That was through the Judiciary Act of 1801. And then when John Adams lost the election to Thomas Jefferson, a lot of the changes have actually been very politically motivated. So John Adams was a Federalist, and Thomas Jefferson was a Democratic Republican. So to kind of stick it to Jefferson a little bit, John Adams passed a legislation to reduce the number to 5 justices, which was quickly overturned once Jefferson got in, so it got back to 6. And then it had at one time been as many as 10 justices under President Lincoln. That was actually made in response following the Dred Scott case. Lincoln wasn't happy with that decision, so he actually put another justice on to kind of change the dynamic of the courts. And then shortly thereafter, under Andrew Johnson, the Congress actually reduced the number to 7. And then under Grant in 1869 is when it actually came to 9 justices. And it's been that way ever since 1869. So I think a lot of people kind of assume that it's always been 9 justices because of the amount of time that's passed. But in 1937, under FDR actually attempted to increase the number of justices. This is kind of like where that term court packing comes from. And what had happened was that, as you all know, FDR was trying to promote the New Deal legislation. And the Supreme Court at that time was overruling a lot of those legislations. So FDR came up with a proposal that for any justice that was over the age of 70 and had been practicing or serving rather for 10 years, he would ask the justice to retire. And if they didn't, he could nominate an additional justice to serve on the bench. So at that time, there were 6 justices that met that criteria. So if none of them retired, it could potentially have increased the bench to 15 justices. It didn't pass, and I think a lot of people were pretty taken aback by it because it was quite a political move. During that time when it was being debated and proposed, Justice Owen Roberts ended up kind of switching the votes on the Supreme Court so that the New Deal legislations were starting to be approved or be upheld. And so the justices remained at 9, and that's actually where the term "a switch in time" saves 9. 9 being the number of justices. little pop trivia in case you do any trivia.
So you just sort of answered, I think, the next question about court packing, although it's back in the news lately for obvious reasons, given that the current president has managed, I believe he appointed 3 justices over the course of the 4 years. Do you have a sense of whether Biden's administration will try to increase the number of justices, or how do you personally feel about it?
I think that Biden has been a little quiet on whether he's going to do any increases or any court packing. I know I think it's mainly a topic of discussion because with Justice Barrett taking over for Justice Ginsburg, the majority is now very, it used to be kind of a 5-4 majority, but now with Justice Barrett, it's a 6-3 leaning towards the right. Now, I personally I know in a perfect world, justices really should be neutral. They really shouldn't be. I don't like to be like, oh, well, based on this political issue, I know where Justice Kagan is going to come in, or I know where Justice Thomas is going to come in. I know that it's so hard because everybody has a political ideology and it's very hard to really separate that. But I always feel that justices, I guess, again, in a perfect world, really should be neutral. But it has become very either right or left, depending on who you're talking about. So I think it is a little early to know exactly where Justice Barrett will be coming down on the court, but it probably will be a 6-3 leaning towards the right side of the political spectrum. Again, just as I kind of explained, I do prefer to have a more neutral bench. And I do think that if the Biden administration were to increase it, it's very hard to not see that as a strictly political move. And my concern is that if they do increase it, would the next administration then have to increase it? And then the next when does it are we going to have a 29 justice bench at some point? But that's I think that's the concern, is that when you do have court packing, it's seen as a very political move. And it kind of interrupts that idea of neutrality and of political independence. And I think that's what people are worried about when that topic comes up. Again, it has happened in the past, and every time it has happened in the past, it has been a political move. So I think you can't say court packing in politics without talking about one of the same. So, but again, I think that there is concern as to if it is a certain leaning, like a right-leaning bench, it does have people concerned about what the implications could be with certain hot button controversial issues.
But basically, it's nothing new.
It's not. Yeah, I think that people, again, the latest attempt to do court packing was 1937, so it has been a while. But it is legal in the sense that there's no limitations based in the Constitution as to the number of justices that can serve. So it is a congressional decision.
Thanks, Kim.
You're welcome.
As I was telling you earlier, I realize I don't really watch a lot of lawyer shows or read a lot of lawyer books. So I only had two things on my list. One thing, when I was little, my sister and I, we were kind of weird. So we watched kind of random shows. So we're really into this show called Any Day Now that came out in 98. And it's now on TV again, I guess, because of recent events. But it's about this two friends who are black and white, and they grew up in Birmingham, Alabama in the 60s. And it kind of goes back and forth between them as kids and then them in what was the present day. And one of them is a lawyer, and so was her father in the 60s. So it kind of goes back and forth, showing different ways the law has changed how life is like for them, and how Black people got different rights as time progressed, and also how things haven't changed. Because I'm watching it now, and actually a lot of the stuff they're talking about is still the stuff we're talking about now. So it's a little depressing.
Was that a PBS show, Tracy?
No, it was a Lifetime, actually.
Oh, okay. I was like, wow, I've never heard of that before. I wonder.
Yeah,
it sounds oddly educational in a way.
I thought it was going to be, because like I said, we started watching it since it's on TV again, and I thought it wasn't going to hold up, but it actually does. And then the only other thing that I've watched is The Good Wife, which was it started in 2009, and it ran for 7 seasons. And I didn't even watch the whole series. My sister Tisha, she watched the whole thing. She was obsessed with it, but I only watched the last 2 seasons or so. And that's about this woman who her husband was a governor, and I think he cheated and got arrested, and then she decides to go back to law school. She either was in law school or she went back to law school and became a lawyer, and it kind of shows her working in law and her different practices and different stuff she does. I think it's a pretty good show. I liked it a lot. It ended kind of weird, but overall,
Isn't there a sequel to that now?
Yeah, I'm not sure what it's called. The Good Fight.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know I haven't watched either of those shows, but I know that The Good Wife always got good reviews, and I thought that they had a spin-off of it.
I've heard it's one of the more, I mean, you would know more than me, obviously, but I've heard it's one of the more accurate shows. It's not How to Get Away with Murder.
Yeah, we were that one. I did like How to Get Away with Murder in the beginning, but then it got very cringy to watch in terms of the ethical stuff that was going on. I'm like, you know what? I think I'm gonna stop this show. I gave it 3 seasons though, but I do think that a lot of shows and movies don't really they show really just the surface. Actually, they show kind of the conclusion of the legal process. You know, they just really show the courtrooms, because that is the more interesting part of it. You know, if you were to just walk into my office, you would probably see me in front of the computer with a cup of coffee, researching and writing. That's really what I do. There a lot of, so there is a lot of heat in the legal community as to, how well it's represented. But one of the movies that I think actually hits it on the head the most accurate is My Cousin Vinny, the 1992 comedy with Joe Pesci and Marissa Tomei, because that actually does go into a little bit more of the procedural aspects of it, the jury trial selection, saying if your client is guilty or not guilty. And, you're learning along the way with Vinny as he messes up all the time. And the judge has to, hold him in contempt and everything. But so legally speaking, I do like My Cousin Vinny, but it's a funny movie. I don't know if anybody has seen it, but it's just, the characters are just so funny. Vinny and I forgot what Marissa Tomei's character is. I think it's like Mona Lisa, perhaps. I can't remember, or Lisa. Maybe it's just Lisa. Maybe it's not Mona Lisa. But anyway, it's just and the judge is really funny. He was Herman Munster from the Munster series. So it's kind of funny to see him outside of that makeup and costumes. But it's a funny movie, but it also kind of actually touches a little bit more upon the legal procedures that usually get glossed over. The other day, actually, I was watching, there was a 1957 movie with Henry Fonda called 12 Angry Men, which is another really good movie. And I like it because it kind of touches upon another aspect of the law and the legal proceedings that you don't really see, which is the jury deliberations. So it's set really just in the jury room. In fact, I was reading a little bit more about it, and I think they said that only 3 minutes of the film are actually shot outside of the jury room. So it's all in the jury room. It's set up on a hot, I think they say it's like the hottest day of the year. So, you know, you have these 12 jurors in the room, and you can just, you know, their tensions are all rising higher. And then they also kind of bring in a little bit of their own prejudices and thoughts on the case. And so you really get, even though it doesn't move, or, you know, you don't really move out of that room in the course of the movie, you get a really good character development for a lot of the characters, and you kind of get drawn into the case that they're deliberating on, which is, again, when the movie starts, you don't know anything about it. You know the basics. That's an 18-year-old boy who is accused of killing his father, but you don't hear the closing arguments. You don't hear anything of the case. You just go right into the jury room, and then you have to kind of get like little pieces of it throughout. So you're kind of like in there with them. And it was just a great acting performances by Henry Fonda, Martin Balsam, Jack Klugman. It's a really all-star cast. And
isn't that the movie where there's like the scene, it might be Peter Fonda that does it, he like puts the knife on the table or something?
Yep.
Oh yes, that was a great movie. Yeah, that was a good one.
It's actually kind of funny too, because if you watch some older TV shows, there's been certain TV shows that have kind of mimicked that or parodied that. I think the first one I remember seeing was like Happy Days. Like Fonzie was on the jury, and something with a motorcycle or something. And then my dad just got me a bunch of, he wanted me to try to get into Batgirl with Marlo Thomas. So that was like, I don't know if that was in the 60s or 70s, but anyway, they had another episode that was like that. And, I don't know if anybody here has served on the jury, but it was a pretty good representation as to how they can get. So anyway, that was a really good movie too, that I highly recommend.
Do you want to talk about To Kill a Mockingbird?
Oh yeah, sure. To Kill a Mockingbird's it's a classic, both in movie and in book. It is one of my favorite books that I've read. I just recently saw the movie. I wasn't a big Gregory Peck fan, so I was hesitant to watch it, but it was quite good. And I do think, actually, I was listening to your podcast, is the book better than the movie? And I like your discussion on To Kill a Mockingbird, because I do think that it was the movie was a good adaptation. It wasn't perfect, and I think that they did miss some of the characters that are in the book, like Calpurnia. I think they could have. I loved her in the book, and in the movie she has a much lesser role in it. But the courtroom scene it's very powerful and very moving. And I think that really, if you're going to stick to a point in the book, that's really the point you have to stick to. So I just think the performances in To Kill a Mockingbird really do stand the test of time. And it's such a powerful book that I've read it several times, and every time I read it, I pick up on something new, which is, I think that just tells you how great the book is.
Yeah, and having read it as, I guess an 8th grader or probably freshman in high school, I don't remember exactly when, and then to read it again as an adult, like each time, to me, a sign of a great book is each time you reread it at a different age, it gives you something else. You know what I mean? Like you focus on a different aspect of the book depending on the age you are. So it never gets old. So I thought I was going to be like Tracy and not be able to think of too many books and movies dealing with the law. But then once I started thinking, I found a whole bunch of things, and I had to actually cut stuff out. So I'll be quick because I wrote down too many. So one book that I wanted to mention is called Old Filth by Jane Gardam or Gardam. She's a British writer. I think she's still alive. She's, probably in her 80s. She's written a lot of books. This is one of her more famous books, more famous in England. She's not very famous here, but Filth stands for Failed in London, Try Hong Kong, which is I guess, an acronym that was popular in England for lawyers that could not cut the mustard in England, and they would go overseas to one of the many, colonies and practice law over there. So this novel it's about a lawyer, whose nickname is Old Phil, who's sort of in his waning days of practicing. He's back in England. His mind is starting to go a little bit, but it was very. It doesn't sound like something it would be so engrossing, but it is. It's really entertaining. She's a wonderful writer, and it really gives you if you have no idea how British law system works, you get the nuts and bolts in a very entertaining way. So I enjoyed it. In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, which is extremely famous for being one of the first quote unquote like creative nonfiction novels. It's a genius book, incredibly engrossing. Harper Lee, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird, was his research assistant when he went out to Kansas to investigate this murder of a family, the Clutter family in Kansas. And the book is about the family's history. It's about the community that they lived in. And then the third part is all about the two men who are accused of murdering the family. And Capote's growing fascination and relationship with both the murderers as he's doing his research. It's excellent. The Crucible by Arthur Miller, which is a play that most people had to read in high school. I think my kids, I think they read it. But it's about the Salem witch trials. It's one of his most famous works. When it was written, a lot of people think he wrote it about the Salem witch trials, but also in response to the HUAC hearings, Joseph McCartney's anti-communist hearings in the 50s in Congress, the witch hunt that was going on, sort of an examination of mob mentality through the Salem witch trials. There's also a great movie. There's probably there's at least two adaptations of the play and film. And I know that the latest one was probably about 20 years ago already with Daniel Day-Lewis and Winona Ryder, which is really good. The last book is by Michael Gilmore. It's called Shot in the Heart. It's one of my favorite memoirs of all time. It's like once you start reading it, you can't put it down. He's the brother of Gary Gilmore, who was he had been arrested many times, but he was arrested eventually for killing two Mormon men in Utah. I'm not sure exactly when. It might have been the late 60s, early 70s. But anyway, he was convicted of murdering these two men, first degree, and he demanded to be executed by firing squad because he was brought up Mormon, and there was this idea of blood atonement for your sins. But Michael Gilmore is his younger brother, who eventually became one of Rolling Stone magazine's main music writers. But this memoir is about his brother. It's just about his whole family and coming to terms with how his brother became the person he was. And the films that I loved, In the Name of the Father, which is about the Guildford Four, who were four Irish men that were accused of bombing the Guildford pub in 1974 outside of London. This is during the height of the Troubles, the IRA fighting against British rule in Northern Ireland. And they had passed, the government of England, because there was a lot of bombings going on at this time, they passed a Prevention of Terrorism Act, which basically allowed them to sweep up people that were suspects and hold them for indefinitely until they confessed or until they really had to let them go. But anyway, these four men were picked up even though there was no evidence linking them to the bombing, and they were tortured, and they eventually signed confessions, and they were sentenced to life in prison. And the movie is about that, and it's also about the fight to get them out. And it turns out that the person who actually was behind the bombings was also in prison at the same time, and he had confessed to the bombings during the original trial. That evidence was buried because the police didn't want to admit they made a mistake, and they didn't want to let these other people out. So the movie's about the fight. They eventually get out of jail because their lawyer uncovers it almost by accident that the police had suppressed evidence. Reversal of Fortune, which is incredibly entertaining movie. Jeremy Irons and Glenn Close star. It's about the Klaus von Bülow case, which was all in the news in the 80s when I was a kid. Klaus von Bülow was this incredibly wealthy, I think he was from Austria, socialite, and his wife was slipped into a coma, and she couldn't be revived. She was basically on life support, and he was convicted of trying to kill her. He got an appeal and a retrial, and I don't know if it was appeal or retrial, but anyway, he hires the illustrious Alan Dershowitz, who is all in the news these days, with his cohort Rudy Giuliani for defending Trump. And Dershowitz basically gets him off the murder charge. And it's a great movie. It's so, I mean, I don't know how accurate it is about it shows all the Dershowitz working. He was a professor of law, and he was working with all his students, sort of helping him try this case and come up with the case that would get Bülow off. And Jeremy Irons is just a genius in it. It's incredible. And my last one is Miracle on 34th Street, because I love that movie from when I was a kid, and proves that Santa Claus is real. And I love that scene at the end where it's so clever and sweet. Yeah. So
that is a good movie. I do like Miracle on 34th Street. I didn't get a chance to watch it this past Christmas, but it is funny when they bring in all the characters,
all the letters, and say the post office. Yeah.
It's funny because, okay, so like I love true crime, and I have read a lot of true crime books, and I've watched a lot of true crime documentaries, anything like that. But I feel like that is more about the crime and after the court case, what happened, were people outraged or not. I feel like it doesn't have that much to do with the actual legal process. It's just kind of like fluff. And actually, Kim, I'd be interested to hear your take on true crime documentaries like Making a Murderer, and like how they portray the legal process. But yeah, so I haven't like really read a lot of books like that. And it's funny because like I feel like the glamorous side of it has already kind of like been done. Like when I was a kid, every week I would watch Ally McBeal with my parents like religiously, but you know, that show is ridiculous. And that's obviously not what a law office is like.
It's actually recommended in law school not to watch Ally McBeal.
Really? Oh, that's so funny.
At least in terms of preparing for oral arguments, they're like, don't watch Ally McBeal. Don't.
Yeah. I rewatched some of it recently as an adult, and I was like, this you know, it's funny though. It's definitely entertaining. I mean, Calista Flockhart and her little outfits. I remember I wanted to be a lawyer after watching the show. I was like, oh yeah, this is for me. I love this. And like, yeah, but you know, I did really like what I thought was an interesting look at what the actual courtroom process was like is, I don't know if you guys watched the People versus O.J. Simpson. The one, not the documentary, but the show was like Sarah Paulson, and Cuba Gooding Jr. plays O.J. Simpson, and David Schwimmer plays Rob Kardashian, which is great. That was interesting because it really showed how subject to what, or I guess really how not subject, but also subject to what is going on in the world at that time, how it can affect what happens in the courtroom and how the jury deliberates and thinks. And I found that to be really fascinating. And also it just kind of shows how a lot of things happen that seem to be sort of unfair to everybody else, but the reality of the law, I think, is different than what people perceive to be, you know, what's legal, what's illegal, and what's right and not right. So I really liked that. I would recommend watching that. I remember really liking The Pelican Brief. I read the book years ago after seeing the movie, which is, I think it's about like Julia Roberts and Denzel Washington start investigating a case after I think two Supreme Court justices are assassinated, which I don't think has ever happened before in real life, although
I don't believe so, but I mean, there have been, I mean, over the course of history, there's been, I think, like over 100 justices. So I don't remember seeing anything like that happen, but can't rule it out either.
Yeah, I mean, you never heard about it, right? It's not like a famous thing. But yeah, I guess that would be kind of interesting to know. One book that I read that I really liked was a nonfiction book, and it's not necessarily about like the courtroom, but it's called The 57 Bus, A True Story of Two Teenagers and the Crime That Changed Their Lives by Dashka Slater. And it's a book about a case that happened in, I think, California, San Diego, San Francisco, one of those San cities. And these two kids lit like another kid on fire on a bus, and they were making fun of him. He was wearing like a skirt and he was sleeping, and they lit him on fire and then got off the bus. And then the kid survived. I think he has like burns all over his legs, but the case is about sort of what happens to juvenile offenders and whether or not what happens to them is fair, which I find to be really fascinating. I mean, that's a whole topic unto itself. But that was a really, really interesting look at about that whole system and the juvenile system that I did not know about. So I would recommend anyone to read that. It's not a long book. I think it's geared towards young adults, so it's not too hard to swallow. But that's all I have. Because I feel like you can't say that a true crime book is necessarily about the law. So
yeah, and just when you were talking about the People versus OJ, I thought that was actually very well done. I was very young with the OJ Simpson trial. I mean, I kind of knew the highlights of it, but I never actually watched the trial. So anyway, but I thought it was really interesting because I did kind of take a look at both, what goes on in terms of prepping for the court decision or the court presentations, and there was also an episode where they had about just about the jury too, which I thought was very interesting. But that was very good. They have this series on Netflix. I haven't watched it yet, but it's called Trial by Media, and I think it's kind of what you were talking about, Georgia, where especially with media and reporting on the court cases, they probably do kind of have an influence as to both what the juries think and what people think. I know that there was one court decision that was coming out. It was heavily, I can't remember which one it was, but it was heavily discussed.
Criticized, yeah.
Well, just discussed a lot. And I remember they announced what the decision was, and I was like, I can't believe it. But I'm like, well, actually, I didn't hear any of the evidence. I'm just going off of what was presented to me. So I'd really like to, like I said, I haven't checked it out personally, but I think it's an interesting question as to, how much the media influences some of these more high profile cases that are being discussed. Because, I mean, yes, you can watch the trials usually, but most people don't. They just kind of pick up the headlines and stuff. So anyway, and in terms of true crime, I know you had asked me a question. I don't have the stomach for true crime. I learned that when I was watching something, I think The Staircase. And then I was like, oh my gosh, this is
a lot of blood in that one.
Yeah. So I'm like, maybe not.
Like I was talking to someone about like the Amanda Knox case, and they were saying that she was saying that the media portrayed it one way, but then when she read one of the, I think it was Tisha, she read all the different biographies that came out about, or not biographies, the memoirs that like she wrote, and then the parents wrote, and then the I think the other guy who was charged, and just based on the evidence, she was saying like it's a completely different case. So yeah, I could definitely see the media portrays one way.
So Kim, we just have a few questions for you.
Sure.
Some of them, this one you sort of touched on already, but it's like, what books and movies get wrong about the law process that you wish people understood better? Like, are there any like really specific things that you could think of?
Well, I do think, again, kind of like what I mentioned with my cousin, with my cousin Vinny, but just with like a lot of them, they just kind of show just like the end portion of it, which is the trial. There's a lot of stuff. There's of course a lot of filing that needs to be done. There's a lot of research that needs to be done. So they definitely they just kind of really probably show like 5% as to what actually goes on. And a lot of times with the procedures too, there's a lot of waiting around. We have certainly some cases that happen, we're waiting for decisions like 2 years out. I mean, so, a lot of times you see like bang, gavel, and then it's like, here's your decision. But of course, also they don't show appeals or retrials or anything like that. So definitely they just really scratch the surface of that. I will say one thing that really gets under my skin is in Legally Blonde, when Elle Woods got a 179 on the LSAT for studying for a week. That really drives me crazy. I know it's a fun movie, but I can't really, I watched it before I went to law school, and then I watched it after. I'm like, wait, what? I studied 6 months and didn't get a 179. So I do think, and there are also a lot of the unsung heroes. There's a lot of legal secretaries, paralegals, a lot of researchers. That they definitely don't cover too much, and there's also just a lot of areas of the law that they don't cover. Mostly you see criminal law because that's the one that usually goes to trials, but there's real estate, tax law. Not that those are necessarily as glamorous, but they're equally important, and but they're just other aspects of the law that people just probably don't even know about because they're not shown really throughout the media.
It's funny. I was listening to I don't know, it might have been like a Malcolm Gladwell podcast or something. And he said like one of the most boring aspects of law, and maybe you'll agree or maybe you won't, is patent law.
I don't know anything about patent.
Oh.
So, I took a copyright class in law school. It was very interesting, but I know I don't know if I would say it's boring or anything because again I don't practice it, but it's definitely different than criminal law or personal injury law, anything in the trial.
Can you go back and forth? Because the one show that I watch, it's obviously not real, but like I feel like she goes to criminal law, then she'll be in family law, then she'll be. I feel like that can't be.
Yeah, well,
legit.
when you have when you're admitted to court, I think really with the exception of tax law, where you do need actually a separate degree to do tax law. You could. I mean, there are firms that are very specialized in an area. Like our firm does environmental land use real estate, so we're very specialized. Well, we're not specialized, but that's our focus, I should say, because to be specialized, you actually have to have certain credentials. But we that's the area that we focus on. But there are other law firms that either bigger or even solos that they do general law. So you can have someone who does family law, probate, trust and estates, personal injury. So it just depends on whatever you feel comfortable with. But you also just want to make sure that when you're talking to a lawyer, that they're well versed in the subject matter that they are representing you on, because that's those topics are they can really be all over the spectrum. So, but yes, it is possible. Once you have a law degree, you can practice anything you want, and it can be all in the same firm, or a firm can just kind of focus on one area.
Do you have any nonfiction book recommendations for the general public to help us understand legal processes better?
It's a hard question because there probably isn't really like a one-stop shop book, because again, criminal law is different from real estate, which is different from personal injury, so there's not, I can't really think of a book that really kind of covers everything. And the law is changing, including procedure. So that's the other thing, is that you want to make sure that whatever you're reviewing is really up to date. But there are a lot of really good online resources. A lot of courts have a lot of really helpful guidance documents. So either for people who are just interested, or you can represent yourself. You can be an attorney pro se, so you can represent yourself. And the guidance documents do provide some helpful information. Again, there's a lot of just different areas, though, that it's hard to really recommend a particular book on that. But again, if you know what court you would be interested in learning about, a lot of them have rules and guidelines for what to follow. Certain agencies like Department of State, Department of Environmental Conservation, Department of Tax and Finance, they have a lot of helpful guidance documents out there too. But it's definitely, it's a lot. because you have to kind of figure out what court you're going to be in, what the topic is, who, the parties would be, to kind of narrow down what you're looking for. So as I said, you can certainly find that information online. If you ever have any questions about procedures, talking to an attorney would definitely be a helpful suggestion, just to at least get knowledge as to where you want to look, or if you need to hire an attorney. Also, in law school, there was these reference books called horn books, and they kind of were very good for covering a topic just generally, like civil procedure or constitutional law. And I guess they're kind of like a treatise, but they do kind of discuss it more generally and more broad brush, that you can at least understand the topic matter before you dive into a specific area of it.
Gotcha. So recently there's been battles in the library world between certain publishing companies, and they're especially related to ebooks and e-audiobooks and copyright issues. And have you heard anything about that? Or do you know anything about? I think Macmillan was one of the big ones.
Yeah, I have read a little bit about that. I don't know if you want to go a little bit into what the legal battle is, or I can tell you what I read about it. But I guess it's that when libraries want to have ebooks, they're limited based on the publishers. They're limited to like either having like one digital copy, or I think
Macmillan.
They said that you could only have like one book for the first 2 months before you could get other books. And I don't know, maybe you guys can explain a little bit about what an ebook, how you loan out ebooks, because I think that's a topic I don't know, because I always think like, oh, you have ebooks, you can just put it all out, but it's not really like that.
No, it's treated as if it were actual physical book. So you buy, there's different versions of ebooks. There's some you pay, you buy for, you sort of rent it for a year. It can get checked out as many times as possible in the year. Some you buy a certain amount of checkouts. Some it depends on the publisher and the book, but basically it's treated as if it's a physical book. Whereas you buy a copy, you have one copy. If someone takes it out, they have it for whatever 2-4 weeks. It can't be loaned out to anyone else.
The digital copy.
The digital copy, even though in theory it should be able to be loaned out indefinitely to anyone who wants it. And I understand why, because writers need to get paid too. So that's part of it. But they seem to be tightening, especially the Macmillan thing, we're like piling on as far as restrictions and restrictions to loaning. Like you could only get a book, like you were saying, they were restricting how many titles you could buy at a time, and just all these different rules. It seems sort of counterproductive, but yeah, so they're always changing. Like you said, there's laws always changing, depending. I think they were sort of pushing the envelope to see what they could get away with. And then I think they pulled back.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what I had kind of read about. And I guess, legally speaking, it's kind of hard, because it's almost like a licensing agreement. So, you have to negotiate, and I'm sure that these publishers have probably more leeway in what they can give or what they can take, in terms of what libraries can bargain with. They have more of a bargaining chip, the publishers. But I'm almost curious, where you have other digital subscriptions like Audible or Nook, I wonder how they're treated. I don't know if it's different because there's a subscription price that people pay, but that might be something to look at to see, how are other areas with digital books treated? Maybe the libraries are being treated unfairly.
Yeah. Well, we, for example, we have Kindles that we loan out. Obviously, Kindle's owned by Amazon, so they have their grip on that. But I can buy, I believe if I buy a title on for a Kindle, we have 6 Kindles. You can put it on up to 6 devices, but that's also Amazon. So that's a whole other, they have agreements with publishers, and Amazon is obviously one of the most powerful corporations in the world. So I'm sure they have a lot of say in what goes on. But yeah, it's
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking it's sort of, part of the whole, as far as the law is concerned, the virtual world that it's, it is exploded since the 90s with social media and, just the internet being in everyone's home and in everyone's pocket. And the law is like scrambling to catch up. Like they're not, they sort of were not blindsided, but all these companies set themselves up and got going. And now the law is saying, wait a second, you shouldn't be able to do that. Wait a second, you shouldn't be able to do that. And we're seeing the harm that can come from, obviously, very, in a big way recently, with the harm that can come from unregulated corporations. And
yeah, we actually have, that's a very interesting point, Rosemary, because we have the same problem, like, again, what we do land use law. And a lot of times, the world is changing, but zoning laws and other things aren't changing as quickly. So, we have the same kind of questions, even in that aspect. But maybe even talking to legislatures, trying to get more protections for libraries and just protecting them from, what these publishing companies can request or require, before shutting you out. Like I said, it's hard because it is kind of more licensing contract issues, which do have, a lot of back and forth on both sides. But I personally speaking, it definitely sounds like the corporations are just greedy and, not kind of doing it for the public good of what libraries offer. But that's
there is that there's always that clash.
Yeah.
Capitalism against the library world. Well, thank you so much, Kim.
Thank you.
You are a fountain of information. It's awesome. And I'm looking forward to having you do a program on April 10th. That'll be really exciting. I'm very happy that you've agreed to do it. So right now I'm just going to do a little promo bit for Black History Month programs that we are holding on February 11th at 7. We're hosting Colette Fournier, who is an RCC photography professor, and she's going to be presenting a virtual presentation of her photo exhibit, Retrospective Spirit of a People. On February 17th at 7, we're going to be hosting a book discussion with the author Maisie Card. Tracy and I are doing it. She has a wonderful debut novel called These Ghosts Are Family. And I'm really excited that she's going to actually join us for the book discussion. And she's also a librarian in Newark, New Jersey, which makes me love her even more. And on February 23rd, we're having a program about Madam C.J. Walker, who's the first African-American self-made millionaire in the United States. There was a Netflix series recently starring Octavia Butler called Self-Made, which was—
Don't watch it. Sorry.
Don't watch it, I know.
It's really bad.
Very good. I was so sad because I was gonna watch, I don't know. I was gonna watch it before the program that we're having, but maybe I'll wait. I was so excited when I saw that, and I was like, oh, and I love Octavia Butler, but I heard it was bad too. There is a really good Madam C.J. Walker website. That's www.madamcjwalker.com that I think her great-granddaughter runs. It's really beautiful. There's a lot of great information there. And also, a little fact, her mansion, Villa Nuaro, is a National Historic Landmark, and it's in Irvington on Hudson across the river. I think it's being restored, so I don't think you can actually go visit it right now, but I've seen pictures and it looks spectacular. So that's what we're doing for Black History Month at the Nyack Library. And next episode for February, we're gonna have, our special guest is gonna be local artist and our Nyack Library devotee, one of our big all-time fanboys, Dan White, who is going to be our special guest. He's a wonderful visual artist, very funny, just a great guy. And I'm really looking forward to talking to Dan about books, movies, art, whatever he wants to talk about.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Okay, so if you want to learn more about the Nyack Library and everything that we do, you can check out our Twitter and our Instagram at Nyack Library, or you can check out our Facebook, facebook.com/Nyack Library. You can go to our website, nyacklibrary.org. We also have a YouTube channel, which is called the Nyack Library from Home. If you have any questions, you can always send us an email at info@nyacklibrary.org. And I am Georgia.
I'm Rosemary.
And I'm Tracy. Thank you again, Kim. You've been great and you have so much knowledge, and I really appreciate you doing this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening to episode 4 of Paper Cut.
And stop recording, right?
Stop. Yeah.
Okay. This is always a process when we're done. Okay, did I stop? No, I didn't. Stop recording.